I want to see if I can demonstrate that eating animals is unethical, demonstrably unethical, and that we've known it's been demonstrably unethical for quite a long time, but people are just resisting to accept that fact. Okay, people's arguments against eating meat usually take one of three forms. The argument from nature, the argument from health, and the argument from superiority. The argument from nature is really simple. It says that, oh, we've always eaten meat. Our hominid ancestors ate meat. Our closest hominid relatives perhaps eat meat. We have the teeth for eating meat. Nature tells us to do it, therefore we should do it. This is a naturalist fallacy. It's been discounted in philosophy and ethics for at least 150 years, and it's demonstrably false. Our ancestors did lots of things, and we would not, I don't think, want to go back and repeat them. And if you want an analogy for that, we can look at the history of rape. Not a very pleasant topic, but nevertheless, you know, it has been argued, not very successfully, that many of our ancestors were rapists, and we wouldn't be around today if our successful rapist ancestors hadn't been so good at what they chose to do. It's a contentious argument and probably wrong, but let's say it's right. Let's say every single one of our ancestors, right up to our own parents, were a bunch of rapists. Would that make it okay for us to be rapists? No, of course it doesn't. Not a chance. And the same thing applies to eating meat and to anything else. Even if it could be demonstrated that every single one of our hominid ancestors, and ancestors prior to that, and there's not good evidence of this, but even if it could be demonstrated that all of our ancestors, including our parents, and perhaps even including ourselves up to yesterday, ate meat, it still can't be used as part of an ethical argument because it's a naturalist fallacy. It doesn't belong in ethics. Second one, health. It's argued that our bodies are designed for eating meat, and if we don't eat meat occasionally or regularly, then our health will suffer. We might even die. I don't know how I've managed to survive so long, but apparently I have. But again, this is demonstrably untrue, or it's demonstrably unconnected to any kind of ethical choice. If I can use an analogy again, there was a plane crash in the Andes mountains in South America about 50 years ago in which a rugby team was stranded in the Andes, and everyone thought they were dead, but they were stranded there for like a year or so. And when they were found, it turned out that they managed to stay alive, the ones who were alive, by consuming the dead bodies of their teammates. There was a film and a book made of it called Alive. But no one comes away from that experience and says, oh, right, well, these people needed this particular nutrient source, they needed this particular kind of food for their health and to maintain their lives, therefore eating human corpses is ethical. No, we just made excuses for those particular peoples under extreme circumstances. We forgave them, we recognised they'd done something wrong, they recognised they'd done something wrong, and some of them had a real problem with that, understandably. But we forgave them, we made allowances, and we let them get on with it. We didn't say, oh, well, it's okay then. As for those people on the Andes Mountains, so with the rest of us. Even if we can say to ourselves, oh well, our ancestors were in extreme circumstances. They didn't know what they were doing. We do know what we're doing. We're not under extreme circumstances. There's no excuse. Okay, the third one is the argument from superiority, which basically says, and some people make this in a kind of covert way, it basically says that humans are very different to animals. There's a clear dividing line between humans and animals, and to eat an animal there's no more consequences to eating animals than there is to eating plants. Well, we know that isn't true. And we know that because it's enshrined in law, isn't it? We know that we do indeed have ethical responsibilities and accountabilities towards animals. If we didn't, there wouldn't be legislation about that. But there's very strict legislation about how slaughterhouses operate, how medical testing centres on animals operate, how we're allowed to treat our pets, what we're allowed to do with animals in nature, how hunting laws operate. We're not allowed to torture animals, we're not allowed to give animals, as is sometimes referred to as, needless suffering. Because we recognise that they are animals capable of suffering, and that we have an ethical responsibility to alleviate that or to minimise that. The only argument, and it's only made for convenience sake, not for good ethical reasons, is to what extent that suffering is allowed. And from my point of view, and from the point of view of most ethical vegetarians, there's no reason at all why animals should be slaughtered and why those kinds of allowances should be made. None at all. What's sometimes said in relation to this animal suffering thing, the ethics of allowing animal suffering, is that, well, perhaps we should take animals and just anaesthetise them when they're very small and then grow them in tanks or in vats of nutrients. and then it would be okay, wouldn't it? Well, no, it wouldn't, I'm afraid, because and if I can refer here to the ethicist Jeremy Bentham, who's a really good source for this stuff. Jeremy Bentham said, famously, that the key thing about animal welfare isn't to ask whether animals can think, it's whether they can suffer, whether they can suffer. He didn't say whether they do suffer, he said whether they can suffer, whether they have the capacity for suffering. And there's a good reason for that. Because if you don't make the distinction between the potential for suffering and suffering itself, then you open the floodgates to other kinds of ethical statements, like is it okay to consume humans if we anaesthetise them at birth, rather like in the Matrix, and grow them in vats and harvest them at a certain point for their limbs and their flesh? Well, we can say no, obviously not, but that obviousness is because we're not judging whether they do suffer or not, we're judging whether they can suffer. And ethical statements are always of that type. So for all of those reasons, the arguments against eating meat have been fought and won a long time ago. And they're enshrined in legislation in the forms of animal welfare laws. They're enshrined in the history of ethics in terms of a refutation of the naturalist fallacy. And they're enshrined in common sense, really, if you spend your time to think about it. But of course people don't, because people want to carry on eating their bacon sandwiches and mistaking their own desires, mistaking the cultivated taste buds, the sensation they have from that. They're mistaking that for any kind of ethical statement. And because some people like to be badass, particularly 14-year-olds. I'm guessing I'll probably get some 14-year-old boys, or people with the mentality of 14-year-old boys, posting comments below this video telling me that they're eating a bacon sandwich right now. Because it's kind of badass, it's kind of like scratching your name on a school desk, isn't it, really, saying that kind of thing. But yeah, it's not really badass at all, is it? It's just being a bit of an asshole. Anyway, this is what nature looks like. Look how red in tooth and claw nature is. I'm at Argyle Lake. It's beautiful, look. The bluebells are out, he says. I'll just point to this church, it's a rather nice church. Mabe Church. And my dog. What do you think, Phoebe? You think it's okay to eat animals? She thinks it's fine.